A formal good evening to you all. Thank you for joining us once again for our monthly series on Theologies of Transformation and Actions for Justice. You've probably heard the spiel by now, but Interfaith Action has 10 interfaith principles that guide our life and work. You may be familiar with our 3 thematic areas of common home, common life, and common good, but these 10 principles get at some of the nitty-gritty of what we're about as an organization and what drives our work. So this is actually our 7th conversation. Last month, the Reverend Sal Sapienza gave a reflection on our 6th principle of protecting and preserving our common home. And you can find these conversations on Apple Podcasts and YouTube. And tonight we will be discussing our 7th principle on an ethic of hospitality, migrants and communities of faith. We had the opportunity, like we were talking about earlier, to celebrate the harvest and harvesters just a week ago, which was a celebration for the bounty of creation and for those who care for it, especially migrant workers. So it's fitting that we're having this conversation at all times, but looking forward to our conversation tonight. I'm going to actually share, as I have been, the principle on my screen. I need just a moment. All of our faith traditions contain holy stories about migration and the importance of welcoming the stranger and the migrant as fully belonging in our common home, the household of God. Inspired by these traditions, we commit to solidarity with migrants around the world and work to ensure their dignity, human rights, and their protection. Our holy writings remind us that the outsider must be included and is often the bearer of transformation.
You don't have a heating fan. I looked for the heating fan.
And here to lead us in this conversation is Dr. Tatiana Reinoza, who is on the board of Interfaith Action and is also an assistant professor in the Department of Art History, and Design at the University of Notre Dame, and is also on a sabbatical this year at the Geddes Museum in warm California, in a warmer place than many of us are right now. Dr. Reinoza's research and writing focus on contemporary Latinx art, and she specializes in the history of printmaking of Latinx artists in the United States, with an emphasis on the themes of immigration, race, and histories of colonialism. Tatiana, thank you so much for your time and looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Stephen, for that warm welcome, and thank you all for joining us this evening. Afternoon for me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that I can pull up some images. And there we go. Can everyone see it? Yep.
Yeah.
Great. So the title of my talk today is An Ethic of Hospitality, Art, Migration, and Communities of Faith. And I want to begin with the disclaimer that I was raised Catholic, and so that is the faith tradition that I'm most familiar with, and the rituals and iconographies that I'm most familiar with. But you know, in the service of having an interfaith conversation, I've also brought in a couple of examples from the Jewish community and the Muslim community so that we can put this in a broader context. And as Stephen mentioned, I am on sabbatical this year. I am actually doing a project here at the Getty Museum. The Getty Research Institute has fellowships that are themed every year, and the theme for this year is actually art and migration. So I'm beginning a new project that looks at Central American diaspora photographers and how they return to their homeland and try to tell a different story of this place through family history. But let's get started. So as Stephen already said, we're talking about the 7th Interfaith Action principle today, and I'm going to come back to this slide when we open it up for conversation. But it's really about thinking about how we can commit to solidarity with migrants around the world, ensure their dignity, human rights, and protection. So I wanted to think about how art offers an avenue for that, both on a level of affect, it really tugs on our heartstrings and creates this emotional connection, but also on the level of intellect, right? It makes us think differently about some of these issues. It helps us consider things from very different perspectives. And I think that's what's so powerful about writing about art and also about teaching art. So I wanted to start with the work of Tony Ortega. He is a Colorado-based Mexican-American artist. And in 2006, Ortega was really moved by seeing the millions of people who decided to march. And this kind of protest movement for immigrant rights began in Chicago. Many of you might recall that in 2006. And then it spread to cities all over the country. And it really kind of motivated him to think about important icons like the Virgin of Guadalupe, and also the Statue of Liberty, right? These are really important icons that he tried to combine to talk about immigrant rights. And I'll come back to this print, but I just want to show you a little bit about the artist. So we're going to watch a very short video.
I make art just like I need to breathe, or I make art just like I need to eat. I mean, I make art because I need to. That's how I survive. My work is about identity. It's about being Mexican American. My name is Tony Ortega. I'm a visual artist, a painter, printmaker. I live here in Denver, Colorado. I see myself as an expressionistic artist. I work from the heart. I work with a real bold use of color, not necessarily primary color, but color that has a little more saturation, more punch to it. What I'm doing is I'm using alternative tools to make marks.
That thing's open, right?
Not trying to simulate the texture, but to exaggerate it a little
Like
bit.
it's pulled out, right? Okay.
Initially, when I first started making my work, I started doing genre scenes, everyday life. But also I started painting the collective, the community, family, the workers, students, commuters, athletes, whatever I could find in the neighborhood where the studio was or throughout my travels. And I've been making these hybrid images, and these hybrid images are drawn from popular American culture and popular Mexican culture. So I'll bring Our Lady of Guadalupe with the Statue of Liberty, or I'll put Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera as Mexican Gothic instead of American Gothic. But recently I've been making some silkscreen, but working with acrylic underpainting. And I think that, artists are more open now to not just using a paintbrush. So I've been using scrapers, I've been sanding back into things. I've also been using squeegees in order to move the paint. So I've been diluting the paint a little bit with acrylic medium to make it more transparent, and then painting it on the panels, and then using squeegees to have the colors run together, blend together. But you see transitions. You don't get quite as
So I just wanted to show a little bit about Ortega's process so you understand that he's both a painter and a printmaker, a faculty member at Regis, and how he's really interested in combining popular culture icons, as he said, from both cultures, right? From the Mexican side and from the US side. And that's what creates this very interesting icon of Lupe Liberty, as he calls her. And for those of you who may not be familiar with this faith tradition, the Virgin of Guadalupe is a really important figure in the Catholic faith. She's the mother of Christ, and as a maternal figure, all Catholics pray to her and ask her for protection and for guidance. She's also the patroness of the Americas, and as such, she carries this kind of level of connection to many of these Latin American countries. And she's been used as an icon, she's been used as part of many Latinx social movements. So when Cesar Chavez marched from Delano to Sacramento, United Farm Workers were carrying a banner of the Virgin. And so it's a really important icon of faith. And she's a brown-skinned virgin, which also has kind of a racial politics to it, right? For many of these communities. And so Ortega really thought about what it would be to combine this figure with the Statue of Liberty, which is so symbolic for European immigrants, right? When they first arrived to the shores of New York and saw that. And he was doing this at a time when there was proposed legislation in 2006, which would make illegal entry a felony for immigrants. And that's what set off many of the protests nationwide. But also it really moved members of the Catholic faith and leaders in the Catholic Church, like Cardinal Roger Mahony from the Archdiocese of LA, to actually call on their priests and say, no, you should defy any law that requires you to ask for documentation of your parishioners. So it was a kind of an important symbolic moment. And continuing with this Catholic iconography, I wanted to show the work of another artist, Sandra Fernandez, who was born in New York to Ecuadorian immigrants. Her father actually joined the US military, and her mother decided to take Sandra back to Quito, where she grew up. And she eventually returned as an adult to study art here in the United States. And eventually she took a teaching post in Texas. She's a printmaker, and she also makes artist books. And while she was in Texas, she learned firsthand of the struggles of young immigrants who are known as the Dreamers, children who were brought to the US before their 15th or 16th birthday, and who under the Obama administration became eligible to apply for deferred action for childhood arrivals, which granted them the ability to work, but also to attend college, and protected them against deportation. And so this was a really important moment when a lot of these youth kind of came out of the shadows and really got mobilized to begin a very kind of public display of fighting for immigrant rights. And for Fernandez, this was really important. It's something that she herself identified with. She was also a faculty member, so some of her students were Dreamers. And so she decided to create works like Caution, Dreamers In or On Site, which is a portrait of these Dreamers. Some of these are her students. She actually photographed them and then transferred those photos into this silkscreen medium or screen print medium. And she places their portraits over this port of entry map, which is the El Paso port of entry, and provides a number of other icons. We see the Running Immigrants Road sign that some of you might recognize here at the center. We see how that sign is transformed up above with the running graduates who have their little cap and gown. And also there's a series of writing that's kind of underneath some of that imagery and some of that. Oh, by the way, this is the artist, Sandra Fernandez. She's next to Sam Coronado, who is the director of the workshop where she made this print, and the master printers, Jonathan Rebolloso and Logan Hill, who are in the background. And here they are proofing the work. But the writing that you see in the background of the print actually comes from the Codex Mendoza, which is a 16th century document that was created. The governor of New Spain requested that they make this document shortly after the fall of Tenochtitlan. And he wanted to send it to the King of Spain to be able to say, you know, this is how the Aztec Empire was organized. These are the resources. This is what we have available to us, right? And so for the artist, this document represents this relationship between the dominator and the dominated, right? And this kind of reference to colonialism is for her a basis of current injustices that still exist today, and that kind of dictate some of our ideas around nativism in this country. And I want to call your attention to her use of Milagros, which are really important in the Catholic faith. Milagros are small religious folk charms. Some of you may have seen these. They are used as votive offerings. So depending on the miracle that you might be asking for, you might see you know, someone who has a heart condition might have a heart there, or maybe the heart is a symbol of asking for a loved one. You know, you'll see limbs, you'll see all kinds of references, eyes as well in these religious folk charms. And the artist uses the little charm of the bird in this one to signify flight, travel, but also to talk about migration and safe passage for many of these dreamers. And we see how the bird is actually attached after the print is made, because it's not there in this initial proofing that you see. And she actually uses thread to attach this collage bird into her print. And both of those artists are artists that I'll feature in my forthcoming book. It's called Reclaiming the Americas, Latinx Art and the Politics of Territory, which thinks about how these artists have turned to printmaking to challenge and counter these ideas around xenophobia and nativism in the US. And that's going to be out in April. I also want to talk about a couple other artists. Lazar Segal, for example, is a really important artist who was born in Lithuania. And here I'm going back a little bit in time. I was just showing you a lot of contemporary work, but these ideas around migration and diaspora are as old as art history, right? They've been part of the human story. So Lazar Segal was born in Lithuania to a Jewish family, and he studied art in Germany, and he became part of the German Expressionist movement. But in 1923, after World War I, he settled in Brazil. And I want to remind you that a lot of Europeans moved to Latin America during World War I and World War II. And that became their home and their safe haven. And so he settled in Sao Paulo and became part of this really important movement of modern artists in Sao Paulo. And during the war years, he was really moved by the amount of refugees he was seeing flee Europe, but he also really wanted to connect to his roots, his Jewish roots. And in paintings like Navio de Migrantes, which is Emigrant Ship, he's exploring this theme and thinking about so many, like thousands of immigrants who are leaving in these ocean liners and coming to the Americas. And I want to remind you that some of our ideas around diaspora are really coming from this tradition, from the Jewish tradition, right? When we think of diaspora, we're talking about the scattering of people, the displacement, the dispersion of Jews that happened out of their ancient ancestral homelands and how they settled across the globe. And so for the Jewish community, this is a story that's been happening since the third century BC, right? And we see their dispersal through Greek and Roman times. And you have to think about, like, how did they maintain their sense of Jewishness, their sense of faith, their sense of identity throughout all of this dispersal that takes place. And here is a photo of the artist, just to give you a sense of the scale, right, that he's working with and his process. You see he's gridding out that painting. And this is a photo of his family back in Lithuania. And Lithuania was really affected during World War II. So many Lithuanians had to flee, and many of them came to the United States as well. And, again, he's really trying for viewers to have an emotional response, to understand that these huddled masses, right, are fleeing and looking for safety. And that some of these are the lucky ones, right, that are able to leave, but that they're also suffering. And he tries to convey that in many ways and tries to elicit an emotional response. And finally, I wanted to introduce an artist who's new to me. I was looking for artists who are making work in response to the Syrian refugee crisis. And I found the work of Mohammed Hafez, who is a Syrian-American artist and architect. He was born in Damascus, and he was educated in the Midwest and has done a lot of projects with the University of Chicago. And his recent work is responding to the atrocities of the Syrian war, and the refugee crisis that has displaced almost 7 million Syrians across the world. They have sought asylum in more than 130 countries, as you know, and many of the displaced are based in Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt right now. And some of them are still in refugee camps, awaiting a response. So I want to show you some of the work that he's been making, and we can talk a little bit more about how he's trying to elicit this emotional response, but also get you to think differently about who these folks are and why they're here.
My name is Mohammed Hafez. I am a Syrian-American artist living in the United States, originally from Damascus, Syria. I am trained as an architect. I am not trained as an artist. So the tool that I'm most comfortable with is model building. Tools to build architectural models for our projects and so on. And it started in college while not being able to go home for about a decade. I got extremely homesick, and it just so happened that one night I was so homesick, I was alone, and I grabbed a bunch of scrap material and I started tinkering around. 8, 9, 10 hours later, I had built this architectural facade. I didn't realize where the time went, but I knew it made me feel good to spend this much time in detailing and trying to imagine the narratives of people that inhabited these architectural pieces. And in that sense, basically what took place is art therapy. I was too young and naive to know it was called art therapy or cathartic expression, but I knew it felt good and I knew I wanted to make more. The turn point was when one of my own family members became a refugee in Sweden. Up until that point, I think the war to me, to my immediate family, was something that's present in our lives, but still in the neighboring streets. When my own flesh and blood sister became a refugee in Sweden, and when my own brother-in-law rowed one of those boats across the Mediterranean, crisis hit the home smack center. So that's when I decided to utilize this tool that I had. I knew that it was able to express my feelings towards homesickness, and I believed in the power of art in building bridges and telling stories. And immediately I said, this is the best way to build bridges in a very divided society. And without me opening my mouth with a single word, art speaks louder than any person. So that's when I decided we should tell these stories. What happened with me is I had known these folks for years, and they're such powerful people that there were points about their lives I hadn't heard before this project. Like Farishte from Afghanistan that I knew her for years, and she had single-handedly ran a secret school for girls in a basement in Afghanistan under Taliban to educate girls. And I told her, you know, I know you for years. How come this is the first time you're telling me? And she basically just shrugged her shoulders at me and she said, well, I didn't think it was a big deal. So it's these moments that really, like, for someone that's immersed in the American society as much as I was, I looked at her and said, do you know what the stereotype of a hijab wearing Afghani woman is out there right now? I need to tell your story. Please allow me. And so it took quite a negotiation with her to allow me to tell her story, because there's fear. There's, intimidation, and there's so much to deal with it. And the suitcase that we used for her story is her own mother's, actually.
So what a powerful example, right, of someone who, takes these feelings of a homesickness and creates this new art form, these beautiful sculptural maquettes that recall specific places. And then when the Syrian refugee crisis hits, then takes that idea and really uses it to tell other people's stories and to connect us to their plight. So I wanna stop here and kind of open it up for questions, and I'm happy to go back to a certain image if we need to, or I can also stop sharing my screen so we can see each other.
Yeah, if you wanted to stop sharing, we can always return if someone wants to talk about a particular piece that you shared. But thank you so much, Tatiana, for those vignettes of migration around the world. And yeah, so I'll open it up to the group. Anything that stuck out to you? Any questions for Tatiana as we think about this topic? Yeah, Darlene.
And you may not know the answer, but your first artist, Tony Ortega, I noticed that he didn't have the faces. There's no eyes, no. And
yeah, that's something very characteristic of his work. And he says that it's because he wants other people to see their family, see themselves, see the, get a sense of putting your face on that image, right? And in a way, that's another way of identifying with this story, with this narrative that he's telling you.
Tatiana, how are you?
Hi, Kathleen. Good to see you.
My quick observation on that same piece of art that Ortega did is also these themes where women are concerned, obviously the Virgin of Guadalupe, but I was kind of curious about the woman holding up the Statue of Liberty underneath. That was also kind of intriguing to me. So I wondered if, I just thought there were some interesting themes about women in that piece. I saw this woman like hold the statue, the Liberty, I can't even do it, but yes, anyway, the Statue of Liberty, there's the Virgin of Guadalupe, and I just wondered if there was any explanation about that kind of.
Let me quickly share my screen and we can go back to that image since two people had a question about it. Of course. Okay, here it is. So I think you were maybe referencing there's a little person holding up the Virgin.
Yeah, and so my interpretation was it looked kind of like a woman, but it's really hard to tell.
So in the original image of the Virgin of Guadalupe, there's an angel that holds her up. And so that's probably what you're seeing there at the very bottom of the pedestal.
Right, yeah, so more on the original iconography piece, really, okay, great, because I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's part of the original iconography. There's an angel, there's usually the shape of a crescent moon, and then the figure of the Virgin emerges from it, usually has a mandorla around it as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Other questions, ideas, keywords that struck you?
Well, Tatiana, I mean, I've been intrigued with this for a very long time, and it was sort of summed up toward the end. And talking about the power of art in terms of telling stories and building bridges. And I living in an arts community, probably more sensitive to that than in other places that I've lived, but I've always thought that actually. And I'm so pleased to experience this with you all this evening. Because I think that the power of art to not only tell stories and build bridges, but also to heal is so relevant and important in terms of the lives we're living today. So congratulations on your work. I so look forward to your book, and I hope with Interfaith, we can actually experience more of this and use some of these learnings as we continue to do the work of justice.
Thank you so much, Bobby. And I think you're right. We're very lucky to live in a community there in Southwest Michigan that is very open to different kinds of art, and also doesn't shy away from art that has a political edge, right?
Right.
And some of these works do, because they are inevitably enmeshed in all of these political conflicts that are happening all over the world.
Exactly.
That affect people's lives. So yeah, I feel lucky that that I'm part of that community, and that we can bring these conversations. And I also, you know, I brought my my mail-in ballot that I just got from Michigan to show you guys that all of these things that we talk about are things that, you know, we talk about. Let's vote our faith, right? We have that Vote Our Faith campaign at Interfaith Action, and that, you know, all of these things have real world consequences. And so if you care about migrants, about refugees, about those who are seeking asylum in this country, then really go to the polls and think about that when you vote.
That's right. Go vote.
Please go vote.
Tatiana, I think as you've talked about the Virgin of Guadalupe and kind of the powerful icon she has been for justice movements, as well as an object of spiritual devotion. Where have you seen, or where would you like to see faith communities embrace art that kind of communicates emotionally, spiritually, in a transformative manner, our connection between faith legacies and contemporary justice commitments?
Like, where have I seen those things happen?
Yeah, or where would you like to see them? Any best practice models that you've experienced, or your fantasies about experiencing them?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Sid. You know, I think that for a long time, artists of color have, sorry, just a second. Sorry, my son is getting home and the dog was scared. So for a long time, artists of color in this country have often had to create their own institutions, their own galleries, their own museums and cultural centers in order to mount exhibitions of their work. And that has to do with the racism that still exists in the art world. And that's changing, right? We've seen that change happening since the 80s, 90s, and that continues until today, but it's still there, it still exists. And so I think that to answer your question, like, where would I like to see this? I would like to see this work being shown at more mainstream museums, right? I would like to see MoMA and, you know, places like the Whitney having exhibitions that deal with migration, that deal with the refugee crisis, that take the voices of these artists as seriously as any of the Euro-American artists that they often show. And that being said, I think that we need to also pay our respects and learn about what these communities have organized for, you know, sometimes for decades, right? Whether it's Muslim or Jewish or Latinx communities. They've had institutions for a really long time in this country, and have also been at the forefront of, being a leading voice on these issues. And so we cannot discount any of their work. And in fact, we should center their work, while also asking for mainstream institutions to become more inclusive and to, be able to address all of their constituents, right?
Yes, something I would like Interfaith Action to continue to reflect on is the fact that throughout the ages, faith congregations have often been centers for the creation of art, and also have been galleries for the presentation of art. And it has been a powerful means of developing social consciousness, as well as the application of faith to contemporary realities. And how might our faith communities continue that proud legacy, which doesn't appear to be as strong as it has in other periods of history. So I encourage us, I think, to reflect on what that might mean for us as Interfaith Action.
I think churches have historically played a strong role in supporting artists, especially in regards to these issues and in regards to sanctuary, right? And so it would be nice to see more churches kind of offering their spaces up for exhibitions, for talks, for film screenings. Maybe there's an artist residency that can happen at your church. Maybe those are things that you can plan for, because I think it's a great way to really attract new audiences, using art as a, the conversation starter. That's how I like to think of it. Darlene?
Saying that, we're just starting up a new ministry, Arts of Mediator. And if you know of artists who would like to show some of their work at our church, or I don't know what it would mean to be an artist in residence, but let me know, send them our direction. We'd love that.
Yeah, I can definitely send people your way.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and this question that you started, Sid, has me thinking, as someone who does faith formation work, about just the power of activities in faith communities that get us thinking about migration. Migration is a human story, and each of us comes from another place, and many of us, not all of us, but just activities that particular faith communities can do to explore that reality, I think, is something maybe worth thinking about. But I'm also cognizant we've already kind of run the time. But is there anyone else who had a question that we haven't got to yet, or would like to make an observation?
I would like to make an observation. Thank you so much. Terrific presentation, very thought-provoking. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Larry.
Yeah, ditto. Yeah, thank you so much for this conversation on the common home once again. Last week we did common home on environment, and this week we've returned to the idea of common home, but under the theme of migration, which I think it's interesting to think of in terms of just that commonality, that we share a home, we share this earth, and we are responsible for how we care for it and one another. So you brought that out very well in our conversation tonight, Tatiana, and we look forward to your book this coming spring. Hopefully we can share that as a resource with one another. So thank you so much.